Good afternoon. I'm Jeanette Wider, Managing Editor of Healthcare Innovation. I'm here with Karen Frosio for Compassion Fatigue Reclaim the Joy of Caring program. Karen is a healthcare leader with over 30 years of experience in the educational and healthcare sectors. In addition to holding a master's degree in health administration, Karen is also certified in thanatology in recognition of her expertise to the field of death and dying. Karen is also certified grief counselor, compassion fatigue professional, and is EQI 2.0 certified in the field of emotional intelligence. She is also a mental health first aider trained by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Karen serves as the National Director for the LifeNet Health, a nonprofit tissue bank, and has been with the organization since 2010. In this role, she has had the opportunity to incorporate her passion for engaging with other healthcare professionals and is a frequent conference and workshop presenter on the topic of compassion fatigue. Karen has a broad perspective on the subject from her work with individuals, teams, and leaders across North America. Karen enjoys helping others maximize their emotional intelligence to thwart burnout, incorporate mindfulness to improve resilience, and successfully navigate a healthy work-life balance in order to live and work from a place of abundance. The most frequent comment from her workshop participants is, everyone should be required to take this course. Karen, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. So just to reiterate, today's program is sponsored by LifeNet Health. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands that today's topic is not intended to prescribe care or act as a consultation. So references to compassion fatigue and burnout are not addressing any one type of clinical depression or like diagnosis. In any regard to activities or actions is not a clinical or mental health care recommendation. So my content and my views exist only to offer guidance today. I'm pleased that we can be together today to explore such an important topic because our immediate work and community environment certainly require that we engage with compassion. I think of the 1960s song by Burt Bacharach, "What the world needs now is love, sweet love." Just comes to mind a lot lately with the demands of life and the current extenuating circumstances of COVID-19 make it more and more difficult to operate from a place of compassion. The healthcare system as a whole is really struggling, and I don't need to tell you that everyone is exhausted. Some feel defeated, heartbroken, humbled, frustrated, but we're also seeing outreach, support, and resilience. There's always been a potential for compassion fatigue and burnout in healthcare environments before COVID-19, but I think we would all agree this has definitely escalated it. It's unlike anything we've seen before, and a constant battle is being fought against mental and physical exhaustion, anxiety about an uncertain future for ourselves and patients and work and our loved ones. So end of today's program, we hope that you are able to identify the causes of compassion fatigue and burnout, have a good understanding of your personal risk factors and different symptoms of compassion fatigue and burnout, that you would be able to explain how compassion fatigue and burnout really impact an individual both personally and professionally, and that you'll have a good understanding between what is healthy versus unhealthy caregiving. When I use the word caregiving today, it's a little different than you might typically think. I'm talking about all of us, any of us who serve others. So that goes across all different types of positions and professions. You'll also be able to identify the challenges of keeping compassion fatigue at bay, thwarting compassion fatigue, and knowing what your strengths are that enable you to minimize burnout. And you'll also be able to identify strategies to enhance resilience and to be able to make healthy change. Before we begin, I just want to clarify what compassion means. So it's defined as a feeling of deep sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate suffering. And there's many ways that you can show compassion. Some common ways that you can show compassion to patients or their families or anybody around you that you're working with is to really maintain that eye contact. Let them know that you're actively listening when someone's speaking. Don't interrupt them. Possibly, and it's best to even reiterate what you heard. Respecting and understanding their feelings, showing them that you're being empathetic and offering validation. A gentle touch is often appropriate to show you care, But how difficult has that become these days? We have to stay 6 feet away from each other. It's just really been hard to give somebody a side hug or a pat on the back, hold their hand, this type of thing. We want to be encouraging. That's another way to show compassion, to offer somebody hope that things are going to change. And when we are genuine with our responses and just show our emotions, that's a very compassionate demeanor. Sharing a sympathetic smile is another way to show kindness. Here's another instance where masks have made this very difficult. I try when I pass people in the hallways to always smile. These days that we're just not seeing that from each other. So we just have to get more creative. And then showing concern for privacy is very compassionate action to take. We are often very comfortable in the environments that we're operating in, but many people are not used to that environment. They might not be used to fluorescent lights or the particular sounds that are going on around them that we've become used to. So to protect their dignity, we can ask them to step aside, we can shut a door, things like that. And then being an advocate. When we go to assist, we want to help someone find appropriate resources. And it's so important to remember that you don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to get them to somebody else. They're going to be a better match for them. We want to be considerate by turning off our cell phone, being polite and sensitive. But these days, turning off our cell phone really isn't enough because we might have the sound off. But if you're like me, often it's still sitting to the side. And I can see when something comes in and I will glance down thinking it's important for me to stay on top of something. But there's nothing more important than giving the person in front of you your undivided attention. So if it's going to be a distraction, be sure to put it in your desk drawer, your purse, your pocket, whatever you need to do. Even in the age of charting on our computers, somebody might be sitting in front of us for a meeting. We've got to make sure that we are looking up and making eye contact and nodding in acknowledgement. Very compassionate way to be with others. The model that we're utilizing today, we're considered the helpers. You see the word helpers here. And again, being in a helper role sometimes brings great satisfaction and joy. And then other times we find ourselves completely worn out by the work we do every day and exhausted. So on the left side of this model, you see compassion satisfaction. And these are those positive aspects of working as a helper. And again, when I say helper or caregiver, I'm simply referring to the work that you do every day to serve others. On the other side of this model is compassion fatigue. So these are those negative aspects of working in this role. In the middle, you see providing care and some things that might be both positive and negative while providing that care. Some of those things are the work we do itself, the care or the particular work that we're doing or the situation, the larger system, working with our colleagues, our beliefs about ourselves, or even altruism, how much selfless concern we have for others. So on any given day, we can move between the positive and negative aspects of the impact that these contributing factors can have on us. For example, in the center there, our colleagues can contribute a positive experience when we support each other, and we might even consider our team as friends as well as coworkers. But on the flip side, a coworker might be tough to work with if they bring a negative attitude to the workplace or are constantly asking others to cover their shifts, but they don't ever reciprocate when asked. So particularly in our jobs as healthcare professionals, it's important to recognize stress and understand how it can lead to burnout. While many think that stress and burnout are the same, there is a difference. Stress is often described as a feeling of drowning or too much pressure, too much work, too many expectations. And stress comes from that discrepancy between professional optimism and realism, the reality of the day, the environment, or our expectations. Burnout, on the other hand, is the result of stress. It's a psychological syndrome of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment. Some describe burnout as a gradual erosion of the spirit. I like to describe burnout as being so tired that you can't sleep it off. And in fact, after resting, you might even feel more exhausted rather than refreshed. And sadly, as stress increases, so does one's resistance to getting help. And then the result can be burnout. In fact, someone with burnout may feel so overwhelmed by exhaustion that even the idea of taking a small amount of time to get help that they know they need feels like too much. According to a 2019 Gallup study, at that time, 28% of full time employees reported feeling burnout at work very often or always. And an additional 48% reported feeling burnt out sometimes. That means that most, or 76% of full time employees, nearly 8 in 10, experience burnout on the job at least sometimes. And more recent studies are showing these numbers to continue to increase. Here, you see the compassion fatigue model set up as a professional quality of life scale. And scales, as we know, can easily fluctuate back and forth depending on the weight on either side. So, in any given day, you may both love and hate your job. This is not uncommon. It's also common to see burnout in teams as well. As I'm sure you've seen, one person can quickly infect the team. Compassion fatigue has also been referred to as second victim distress, a phenomenon that can happen to clinicians or others involved in adverse events or errors. Now, support for healthcare professionals to prevent and address compassion fatigue has been growing. As shown in this compassion fatigue model here, burnout, which we know can result from not attending to stress, and secondary trauma are often co-travelers of compassion fatigue. Some examples of secondary trauma could be caring for a patient who reminds you of a family member or friend, or maybe a personal experience from years ago, or maybe you saw your coworker physically hurt by an unruly patient. So we might find these separately or together. They can all coexist. It is important to understand the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout, as they have similar symptoms and yet some clear differences. Compassion fatigue, which Charles Figley calls vicarious traumatization or secondary traumatization, has been described as the emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with those suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. And this creates a secondary traumatic stress in the helper. The American Institute of Stress describes burnout as more of a cumulative process marked by emotional exhaustion and withdrawal associated with increased workload and institutional stress, not trauma related. In 1982, Charles Figley identified secondary trauma as a phenomenon associated with the cost of caring. A subsequent study done in 1992 in the ER setting found that there was a unique form of burnout affecting individuals in caregiving roles. And the term compassion fatigue, which was first used to describe the loss of the ability to nurture that they found could occur in the hospital ER environment. Later articles confirmed that compassion fatigue had emerged as a natural consequence of caring for clients who are in pain, suffering, or traumatized. Now, while historically compassion fatigue had been studied on other professional populations, such as law enforcement and social work, since about 2012, there has been an explosion in the recognition of compassion fatigue in the healthcare profession. And there's now numerous resources available. But I do want to clarify that compassion fatigue is not a set of symptoms. Excuse me, it is a set of symptoms. It is not a disease. And there's many ways to manage compassion fatigue. However, burnout syndrome has now been recognized for the first time in 2019 as an official medical diagnosis. In the World Health Organization's International Classification of Diseases 11th revision, the new diagnosis is defined as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Being familiar with all this helps each of us to develop an awareness of our own fragility and that we need to bring our attention to the connection between body, mind, and spirit. Why is an understanding of compassion fatigue and burnout important? Because they have a big impact on our personal and professional life. Here are some specific symptoms of burnout in the individual, and in those with compassion fatigue can exhibit some of these same symptoms. Biological, physical symptoms of burnout can include things such as exhaustion, lowered immune system, persistent physical ailments, difficulties concentrating, just being mentally tired, even prone to accidents. The individual often lacks interest in self-care practices and might have recurring nightmares or flashbacks. Psychological symptoms, we can see things like bottled up emotions, even the impulse to rescue anyone in need. This person may feel a sense of hopelessness, helplessness, and overall sadness. That apathy that we see sometimes, numbing of all emotions, where somebody's just not having an appropriate response to what's going on around them. They just become really apathetic and they've lost their sense of purpose, and their self-esteem is usually lower at that time as well. Social symptoms can include things like isolating from others and withdrawing from activities and relationships that we used to enjoy. The individual often feels the need to voice excessive complaints about management and colleagues. It's everybody else's fault. You'll see that they typically have low morale and project blame and anger. Even a loss of interest in intimacy is common. Spiritual symptoms, we might see things like somebody dreading working with certain patients or having certain interactions. They might question their beliefs. Why me? Why is this happening to me? I've been trying to do everything just right. They might be angry at God. Where is God in all this? I don't understand. Or just feeling that emptiness and hopelessness or feeling lost. The majority of us are regularly placing the needs of others before our own. However, it's essential to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Inspirational author and speaker Eleanor Brown writes that rest and self-care are so important. She says, when you take time to replenish your spirit, it allows you to serve others from the overflow. So self-care is not selfish because you cannot serve from an empty vessel. I'm always reminded that we are meant to soak up and take in before we can serve others. Kind of like a sponge. If you had a dry sponge and you were trying to get water out of it, you could not do a thing with that sponge until you put it down and let it soak up first. So there are a number of risk factors for compassion fatigue and or burnout. Did something happen once, or does this happen every day? Maybe it's been occurring for years. Was an event so severe that you can't forget what happened? I think back on 9/11, I know right where I was. I know what I was doing. I know what time of day it was. I remember the feelings exactly, my responses to that. The school and community shootings, same type of thing. Most of us remember or know right where we were when we heard that type of news. Even the social distancing orders, from the COVID-19 environment, how long they've continued in place, that's another example of a risk factor. Even the proximity to somebody else, just being close to someone experiencing burnout can contribute to your own feelings of burnout or compassion fatigue. And then personal factors like your support system, your perceptions and beliefs, your current coping strategies. Are you taking time to exercise at the end of every day, or are you having 3 glasses of wine? There's a big difference. These are all factors that can put you at risk for compassion fatigue and for burnout. So we've discussed contributing factors of compassion fatigue while providing care. Those included the system we work in, our colleagues, our beliefs about ourselves, and altruism. Then we looked at the symptoms that can result and the risk factors. But what are some of the actual causes of compassion fatigue that we have some control of? And I want to emphasize that. Corporate systems themselves also must recognize the role they play and act on this to implement change. And we're seeing that in most arenas right now. But what I want to focus on today is some of the causes that we have some control of. So one can develop compassion fatigue from putting the needs of others before our own. And when we've done studies, polling questions and studies, when we present this in person, we find that typically about 78% of respondents or more say that they regularly put the needs of others before their own needs. Another way that causes compassion fatigue is having unresolved past trauma and pain. Also, when we don't have healthy professional and personal life coping skills, and a lack of self-awareness that limits our potential growth and change, as well as giving care to others under stress or with burnout, lacking personal and professional boundaries, and the inability to communicate our needs. How hard is it for you to say no? But I'm asking you for a moment, if you'll look at this list and go back through and place the word I in front of each sentence. I put the needs of others before my own needs sometimes. I do have some unresolved past trauma and pain. I might lack some healthy professional and personal life coping skills. I don't always want to hear what others have to say. I, want to keep doing things the way I'm doing it. My self-awareness might not be all it could be. I definitely continue to give care to others under stress or with burnout. It's hard for me to say no sometimes, and I don't communicate my needs. So in reality, the causes of compassion fatigue are often me-directed and not necessarily caused by others, but sometimes by what we allow, enable, or because of how we choose to view or respond to the situation. So simply by choosing to respond differently, we can help thwart compassion fatigue. This is important because most people do not leave their professions because they no longer want to help others, but because of the burden, pressure, and stress that aren't addressed, leading to burnout. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist, as well as a Holocaust survivor. And he says, that which is to give light must endure burning. What a true statement. Compassion fatigue and burnout are a great risk to professional development and personal growth. Dr. Eric Gentry says, we've all volunteered to be givers of light, but in making that effort, we are all going to burn. That sounds like, a pretty down statement. But what I like about it, when we have that candle analogy, is that we all know candles can be relit, right? Maybe if I don't have a light, maybe I need to ask somebody else for a light. I need the energy from somewhere else. Maybe I need to borrow a candle. Maybe I need to put a new wick or more wax in there. We have some options. Dr. Alan Wolfelt, an acclaimed expert in grief and loss, shares that an open heart allows you to be truly present to another human being's intimate pain. However, it's the same open heart that puts you at risk for compassion fatigue. Even Mother Teresa understood compassion fatigue. She wrote in her plan to her superiors that it was mandatory for her nuns to take an entire year off from their duties every 4 to 5 years to allow them to heal from the effects of their caregiving work. While we may not have the ability or necessarily even the need to take a whole year off, we do need to be aware of our own needs and what we can do to meet them. Now, there are some basic human needs that are elements of the human experience that have been shown to lead to our wholeness, happiness, and self-esteem. And these 3 main basic human needs have been identified in contributing to our wellness. We need to feel safe and secure, to love and be loved, and to be valued and validated. I'd like to share a story of a participant that took this class in Seattle. It's a great example of his need to be valued and validated. He shared that he had poor self-esteem, so he decided to place Post-it notes on his mirror, reminding him of things he liked about himself. And he posted things like, "You have a nice smile. You're kind. You're a good friend." He noticed that simply by reading these things every day made him start feeling better about himself. So he decided to try leaving Post-its for his coworkers to remind them of things that he thought were great about them. This brought them together so much as a team that deep friendships developed. And in fact, they now enjoy each other so much that they regularly hang out even on their time off. And it's wonderful to see how, in addressing his own needs, he then was able to better value and validate others. They even ended up creating a board on the unit for Post-it notes to keep this affirming activity going. But in addition to these three basic human needs, each of us have found that we have other different areas or things or activities that we have found are necessary to our own individual happiness and well-being. To give you an example, after a busy day, I need quiet time to be able to function well and maintain a low stress level and really just, to be a nice person. Each one of us experiences and interprets the world around us differently. We all have different needs. And the way we look at the world is called the window of perception. It's made up and it encompasses our culture, our roots and our identity, how we see ourselves, our physical surroundings, that world around us, and our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, and even our spiritual beliefs. For example, while some of us grew up in safe, predictable environments, others grew up in an environment that wasn't always safe, and responses or events were unpredictable. This colors our interpretation and response to others and events. These different windows of perception must be kept in mind when interacting with others. Someone's response to the same stimuli or event can be completely different from ours, and yet both are equally valid. This knowledge or reminder can help shift our perspective of events and then change how we respond. I think we'd all agree we all want to be more than we can, and we want to give more than we can. But now that we know that compassion fatigue significantly impacts how healthcare professionals interact with all of those around us, with patients' families, our coworkers, and even our own families, how do we break this cycle? I suggest that we start by remembering that we are caregivers, not cure givers. Are you still letting yourself be available when there is nothing left to give? We need to accept that we can't do it all. There are some phrases that can work rather than a straight no. I know a lot of us are really uncomfortable just saying no to somebody because, again, we don't want to seem uncaring, or maybe we're just uncomfortable ever saying that to our management. But I want to give you a few phrases that can work to help you start to set boundaries. Maybe just take a pause and say, let me sleep on that. I'll get back with you on that tomorrow. Maybe you could say, I'm not able to make that a priority right now. But then you could provide an alternate solution and say something like, I think by Q2, I could fit that in, but Q1, I'm just covered, something like that. You can even just say when someone asks you to be somewhere, say it's a surprise party for somebody at the end of the workday and everybody's going, and you can just be honest and say, I have a previous commitment. Maybe your commitment was to go home and, you had an hour to yourself and you're going to take a bath. That's okay. You have a previous commitment. But I've been surprised personally to find that practicing saying no really is a skill. And the more I practice it, the more it rolls off my tongue more naturally. I have even found myself when I'm not on video, but maybe on a phone call, I have literally put my hand over my mouth to keep myself from responding quickly or volunteering for things that I know I would, do a good job at, but I really, have no right to be adding more to my plate right now. So think of that airline attendant who instructs you to put on your oxygen mask first before helping others around you. It's great advice for life in general. We need to embrace the inevitable to care and serve and work from a healthy place. Remember, I talked earlier about that discrepancy between professional optimism and professional realism. We need to retain some healthy skepticism. Things aren't always going to be, peachy keen at every minute of every day. We want to be able to sustain our compassion, not just be compassionate for the first hour when we're, working in the day. Depersonalizing helps us learn to let go, because we cannot try to fix it all. We've got to give up those burdens that cannot be controlled. I think often of the serenity prayer that they use, like in AA. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. We want to remain optimistic and be the solution instead of the problem. We need to have realistic expectations of ourselves and others, to be discerning. And to practice sustainable self-care, learning to manage our time and solve things that can be attended to easily and quickly. Get those off of our list, get them out of the way. Others may not always give you the recognition that you desire and often deserve. So I'd say don't forget to give yourself credit for successes, whether that's a celebration, a personal celebration, or sharing with your friends or family, or even shooting an email out to your team to say, I'm so excited and wanted to share that today, da, 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 da. And it's fantastic to see how our colleagues rally around us, and it lifts their spirits as well to celebrate successes together. So let's consider your strengths and how they'll help you. The good news is that resilience is a learnable skill. And from this, you can dramatically improve your attitude and your health in the face of inevitable stress and requirements that we have every day. Unlike animals, humans have control over their emotions, and we can choose to act or not on an emotional state. So, for example, if I'm scared of going over a bridge, I could still drive, keep my eyes on the car in front of me. Maybe I'm nervous about giving a speech, but I can still make it through. I might be angry at a management or a boss, supervisor at work for something that occurred, but I can take a deep breath and say, I'm not in a position to talk about this right now. Can we pick this up later, after I've given it some thought? Or I can just, walk away, but I can choose not to lash out. So rather than feeling trapped by negative emotions, we can bounce back to a healthy emotional state. We want to have that mindfulness, that social competence, self-regulation, emotional and cognitive flexibility. We want to be able to use our thinking and our behavior to guide our emotions rather than letting our emotions guide our thinking and behavior, which is often the case. And then your attitude towards yourself and your role in the world will enable you to cope more efficiently. And this is what emotional intelligence is all about. It's also referred to as EI or EQ, which is emotional quotient. And we can actually create our own positive reality. Studies have shown that 25 to 50% of our outlook is set by genetics, but 40 to 60% of our happiness is under our own control, and it's directly related to emotional intelligence. It's trite, but it's true. A bad attitude is like a flat tire. You can't go anywhere unless you change it. And emotional contagion is real. Our negative attitude and emotions affects others. It's often a matter of perspective. Let's see how one sentence can have several different meanings. If I walked up to you and I just said, hey, what are you doing? You might say, oh, I'm listening to this presentation on compassion fatigue. But if I place the emphasis somewhere else on the first word and said, what are you doing? Or even if I said, what are you doing? Or what are you doing? Or what are you doing? Or I could change it one last time and say, what are you doing? Where the emphasis is placed, it changes the perspective and the meaning, doesn't it? So sometimes we need to find a new perspective because most of life is handled by your attitude and how you choose to respond to what comes your way. So we need to commit to learn some new ways of approaching a situation and be willing to consider alternatives. It's important to use possibility language instead of problem language. If we look at hardships as a pathway to peace, it completely changes our perspective. As Carol Pearson, the author of The Hero Within, says, the only way out is through. So then obstacles don't block the path. They are the path. There is a lot that we can do to take steps towards healthy change. We can take frequent breaks from what we're doing. I know sometimes it's hard because the demands just are constantly there, but we can stand up and walk down the hall and get a drink of water or step outside for a couple minutes and come back in. We can use that word no that we talked about or the alternatives whenever necessary and incorporate some of those new ways to set boundaries. Finding humor in this situation is always a fantastic option whenever possible, and to just have a good laugh about something. Recognize when you do need help and ask for it. Again, this is something that is typically so difficult for most of us. And then when we ask for that help, we need to make sure that we're being very specific. We're not just saying, hey, could you do the laundry today? Because maybe to somebody that means just sticking it in the machine. But what we really wanted was put it in the laundry, add the soap, put it in the dryer, take them out, fold them, and then please put them away. So sometimes we give up because we feel like people just don't give us what we really need, when in reality, we may need to be more specific what we're asking for. And then, as we already talked about, give yourself credit when credit is due, but I'm going to add, give others credit when credit is due also. Breathing deeply and as often as possible throughout the day is a wonderful step to make healthy change. This is often referred to when people talk about mindfulness. People think of sitting on a mat and closing our eyes and legs crossed and all this. But there's something called mobile mindfulness. And that's just, trying to be completely present to where we are and what we're doing at that moment. Like you're working right now to completely focus on this presentation so that you can get as much as possible out of it. Mobile mindfulness is incorporating things like that into your day. And one of those is breathing. A great breathing exercise that you can incorporate at any time. And I often do this between interactions. So before I click on a WebEx and start the next meeting, or before I enter a room for a meeting, or before I pick up a phone for a call with someone, I will take a moment and do some box breathing. So box breathing like this slows down your breathing and it helps you be fully present to just your breath. So you simply count to 3 as you're bringing in your breath, count to 3 as you hold it, 3 as you breathe out, and 3 as you hold it again, and repeat. So I'm going to ask you to try and do that with me for a moment, okay? You're going to go in 2, 3, hold 2, 3, out 2, 3, hold 2, 3, in 2, 3, hold 2, 3, out 2, 3, hold 2, 3. So you see how that shapes like the box, the 4 sides there. That's why it's called box breathing. I think that will help you, remember that as well. So we want to learn to practice that art of confinement, to be present in the moment and then leave work at work and let go let each interaction go as we engage in a new conversation or activity. So this box breathing can help us do that. So I want to ask you, think about what you currently use as part of your self-care plan. What, are you exercising? Are you spending time with others, with families, with friends, connecting with nature, maybe being outside, maybe some other hobbies, interests, or self-care practices, maybe a mixture of some of those things. Many people have shared that even incorporating music into their day is another form of effective self-care. And studies have shown that it doesn't matter what type of music, whether it's hard rock, metal, classical music, it doesn't matter in the least. It just needs to be something that you like. So if you're already incorporating some of these self-care techniques, you're on the path towards a better work-life balance. Healing and change don't take place in the fast lane. Yet we often have this ATM mentality, don't we? Like we're going to get money out of a machine and we want those immediate results. But imagine if you only withdrew money from your bank account, but you never made a deposit, right? How long would it be before you were bankrupt? People who come across our past deserve our best. So we have an obligation to take care of ourselves. While we may not be able to only do what makes us happy, our day and even life might be better balanced and even filled with more joy if we make a plan to incorporate more of what makes us happy. We've got to look out for and companion ourselves. Dr. Alan Wolfelt advises that while caregiving is honorable and rewarding, if we're not companioning ourselves, your life will be out of balance and you'll likely be both unhappy and ineffective in your work and personal life. But what does it look like to companion ourselves? Well, like the examples of the Seattle participant, by validating others and ourselves, we're both elevated. When we make time to meet our own mental, physical, and emotional needs, then we're able to give from a place of abundance, not scarcity. We've got to make those deposits and not just withdrawals. When we practice self-goodwill, it's manifested, it's shown, it seeps throughout our life. And when we honor those past trauma and hurts, we allow ourselves freedom from that pain that can often control us and controls our responses. By naming and taking ownership of those core issues that might be limiting our personal growth, we create authenticity. I'm sure you've heard that saying that you cannot fix it until you can name it. And by managing our self-care, we're actually welcoming happiness into our lives. So the following markers indicate that change is taking place. Things just start to come together. They just feel right. And people notice that your energy has changed. You're exuding, good energy. You're more engaged and interested. You have a longer attention span. You feel more motivated to succeed. Your energy level is up. You want to network with others and you feel this need to share your knowledge and skills with others. Remember the story of the man with the Post-it notes? When he felt that the positive changes in his own life, he felt he had to share that good feeling with others. So ask yourself, what can I do with what I have in this moment? Remember the professional quality of life model that I showed earlier with the scale of compassion fatigue on the one side and compassion satisfaction on the other? You can't totally control your life, but you can rebalance it. And that's why I like that model of the scale going up and down. We can work to rebalance it. And one way to do that is to look at yourself with compassion and with honesty to reclaim the joy of caring or serving others. You really do hold the key. So I would encourage you to think of it as a makeover, something exciting and fun, something that has the ability to transform your life for the better. But it's a process. It's not an event. Today, this is an event. This is a one-time thing, one-time offering, but a process is long-term. What are you going to do from here now that your antennas are up again about this? So for all of you viewing, I'd suggest right now that you pick up your phone and you take a picture of these two questions. because this is something that you can do later. I highly recommend you try to do it today or tomorrow, that you try to get it in this week or this weekend, and keep the paper then that you do this work on. Keep it nearby and continue to look at it. This activity will help you to create a self-care plan that leads to a better work-life balance. We've used this across the country and have gotten amazing responses from people just making time to reflect on these questions. You'll simply be making a list of the things that you can do to help meet your special set of circumstances, and then another list of what you can ask others to do to support you. Here again, you want to be as specific as possible. As I already mentioned, healthcare professionals typically have a very difficult time asking others for help. But this could be as simple as letting your family know that moving forward, when you come home, you're going to slip into part of the house or the bedroom. You're going to take 15 minutes of quiet time when you first get home to reset. So individual and collective compassionate action are key to creating a better future for ourselves and for all of those that we come in contact with. For those of us that do feel affected by compassion fatigue or burnout, rather than choosing to be frustrated about how we got here or worried of how we're going to move forward, let's now incorporate this knowledge and this awareness for ourselves, for members of our team, for those that we serve, so that we can rekindle the satisfaction and the joy of providing compassion to others in order to care from a place of abundance. With the right tools and practices that start with taking care of ourselves, we can survive and thrive through this tough time. And now I'm going to welcome back Jeanette.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing this presentation with us today. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you again, Karen, and our audience for being here today.